It's a cool autumn evening in 1092, somewhere on the road between Isfahan and Baghdad. You're a young man in your early 20s, dressed in the coarse wool robes of a wandering Sufi mystic. You've been walking this road for days. You smell like dust and sweat. Nobody looks at you twice. You're invisible. That's exactly the point. Tucked inside your robe is a short dagger. You've carried it for weeks. You've rehearsed the movement 1,000 times in your mind. Tonight, one of the most powerful men in the Islamic world, the Grand Vizier Nizam al-Mulk, will be carried past you in his litter after breaking the Ramadan fast with the Sultan himself. When he leans out to hear your petition, you will drive that blade into his chest. You will almost certainly die within seconds. Welcome to life as a medieval assassin. It's nothing like the video games. There's no parkour, no hidden blade strapped to your wrist, no romantic brotherhood of hooded warriors leaping between rooftops. The reality was stranger, darker, and far more fascinating than any fiction. Today, we're looking at what daily life was actually like for the most feared covert operatives of the medieval world. The Nizari Ismaili Fedai, the men who gave us the very word assassin. And I'm warning you now, almost everything you think you know about them is wrong. Let's start at the beginning, because to understand what life was like for these men, you have to understand the world that created them. The birth of the order. In the late 11th century, the Islamic world was fractured. The mighty Seljuk Turks, Sunni Muslims, controlled a vast empire stretching from Central Asia to the edges of the Mediterranean. Within this empire lived millions of Shia Muslims, many of them persecuted, marginalized, and politically powerless. Among the most vulnerable were the Ismailis, a branch of Shia Islam that had split from the mainstream over questions of religious succession going back centuries. Into this volatile world stepped a man named Hassan-i-Sabah. Born around 1050 in the city of Qom in Persia, Hassan was brilliant. He was a devoted theologian, a skilled mathematician, and by all accounts, an extraordinarily charismatic leader. After years of travel and study, including time in Fatimid Cairo, he returned to Persia with a radical idea. The Ismailis didn't need a conventional army to survive. They needed something else entirely. In 1090, Hassan pulled off one of the most remarkable coups in medieval history. He infiltrated the mountain fortress of Alamut in the Alborz Mountains of northern Persia, roughly 200 kilometers from modern Tehran. Some accounts say he disguised himself as a school teacher. Over months, he quietly converted the garrison and local villagers to his cause. When he finally revealed himself, the fortress's lord was ousted without a single drop of blood. Hassan reportedly paid the man 3,000 gold dinars for his trouble and sent him on his way. Alamut, meaning eagle's nest, sat perched on a narrow rock base roughly 180 meters above the valley floor. It was virtually impregnable to direct assault, and from this fortress, Hassan would not descend for the remaining 35 years of his life. From Alamut, Hassan built something unprecedented. A network of mountain fortresses scattered across Persia and later Syria, more than 50 strongholds in total, each surrounded by vast stretches of hostile territory. These weren't just military outposts. Alamut itself housed extensive libraries, laboratories, and gardens where scholars, philosophers, and theologians debated freely. It was an intellectual center as much as a military one. But the fortresses served another purpose entirely. They were the training grounds and staging points for the most feared operatives in the medieval world, the Fedai. who were they really? Here's where we need to separate centuries of myth from what historians actually know. And this is harder than you'd think, because the assassin's own library was burned when the Mongols sacked Alamut in 1256. Almost everything we know comes from their enemies, or from European travelers who visited long after the order's destruction. The men who actually carried out assassinations were called Fedai, meaning those who sacrifice, or the devoted ones. They were not the entire Nizari community. They were a small, elite group drawn from the broader population of believers. The Fedai occupied the lower rungs of a strict internal hierarchy. At the top sat Hassan himself, later succeeded by a line of leaders all known by the title, the Old Man of the Mountain. Below him were the fully initiated Da'i, the preachers and missionaries. Then came the Rafiqs, or comrades, who were partially initiated into the sect's teachings. At the bottom were the Lasiqs, the adherents, and it was from this group that Fedai were selected. So what was daily life actually like for a Fedai in training? This is where the myths get thick. Marco Polo, writing decades after the Mongols had already destroyed Alamut, claimed that young men were drugged with hashish, taken to a secret garden filled with beautiful women and flowing wine, and told this was the paradise that awaited them if they obeyed their master unto death. It's a spectacular story. It's almost certainly nonsense. Modern historians, including Farhad Daftari, one of the foremost scholars on the Nizari Ismailis, have found no credible evidence that hashish or any other drug was systematically used to motivate the Fedai. The very name hashashin, from which our word assassin derives, was likely a derogatory term meaning something closer to outcasts or rabble, used by their Sunni enemies as an insult. It had nothing to do with actual drug use. The truth about their preparation was more practical and, in many ways, more impressive. A Fedai needed to be intelligent, literate, and disciplined. Their missions required them to learn foreign languages, memorize the cultural and religious customs of their targets, and adopt convincing disguises. They studied the layouts of enemy cities. Some infiltrated the households of their targets as servants, advisors, or monks, living under cover for months or even years before striking. Think about that for a moment. A young man from a mountain fortress in Persia would travel hundreds of miles, adopt an entirely new identity, learn to speak and pray and eat like a Sunni courtier or a Christian monk, embed himself in the inner circle of one of the most powerful men alive, and wait. Day after day, week after week, sometimes for the better part of a year, maintaining perfect composure while knowing that when the moment finally came, he would very likely not survive it. That's not the work of a drugged fanatic. That's the work of someone with extraordinary nerve and conviction. The weapon and the method. The Fedai's weapon of choice was almost always the dagger, not poison, not a crossbow from a safe distance, a short blade that required the operative to get close enough to his target to touch him. This was deliberate. The Nizari assassinations were designed to be public, visible, and terrifying. Killing a vizier or a sultan in broad daylight, surrounded by guards, sent a message that no amount of security could protect you. The psychological impact was the point. The assassination of Nizam al-Mulk in October 1092 was the operation that announced the Nizari to the world. Nizam was arguably the most powerful man in the Seljuk Empire, the architect of its administrative systems. A Fedai named Bu Tahir approached his litter disguised as a Sufi mystic, claiming to have a petition. When the old vizier leaned out to receive it, Bu Tahir drove a dagger into his chest. The guards killed the assassin immediately. Hassan reportedly said, upon hearing the news, that the killing of this enemy was the beginning of bliss. Within a month, Sultan Malik Shah himself was dead from illness, and the Seljuk Empire collapsed into over a decade of civil war. One man with a dagger had changed the course of an empire. But here's something crucial that gets lost in the legends. Hassan and his successors preferred not to kill when they could avoid it. Assassination was a last resort, not a first option. Sometimes a dagger left on a sleeping enemy's pillow at night was enough. When the Seljuk ruler Sanjar refused to negotiate with the Ismailis, someone bribed a member of his court to plant a dagger in the ground next to his bed while he slept. Sanjar woke up, found the blade, and received a message. "We could have killed you." He began negotiating immediately. This was asymmetric warfare in its purest form. A tiny sect with no standing army, holding scattered mountain fortresses, managed to hold off empires for nearly 2 centuries through the strategic use of fear. Life inside the fortresses. For the Fedai, who weren't currently on missions, daily life at Alamut and the other Nizari strongholds was centered on religious study, physical training, and community life. These fortresses were self-sustaining communities. Alamut had sophisticated irrigation systems that supported surrounding villages and ensured the fortress could withstand long sieges. There were granaries, water cisterns carved into the rock, and armories. The intellectual life at Alamut was remarkable for its era. Hassan himself was a prolific scholar who wrote theological treatises on epistemology and the nature of religious authority. The fortress's library was famous throughout the Islamic world. When the Mongol historian Juvaini visited Alamut just before its destruction, he described elaborate storage facilities and an extensive collection of texts. He burned many of them as heretical, but notably, he never mentioned the legendary Gardens of Paradise that Marco Polo would later describe. If such gardens had existed, an anti-Ismaili historian looking for evidence of debauchery would surely have noted them. The Nizari also minted their own coins, maintained diplomatic relations with various powers, and operated a sophisticated intelligence network that spanned the Middle East. The Assassins and the Crusaders. In Syria, the Nizari established a parallel network of fortresses under a separate leader, also known as the Old Man of the Mountain. It was here that the Assassins came into contact with the Crusaders, and where some of the most dramatic episodes in their history played out. The Syrian Nizari, under the leadership of Rashid al-Din Sinan in the late 12th century, were arguably even bolder than their Persian counterparts. Sinan twice attempted to kill Saladin himself. After the second attempt, the great sultan reportedly discovered that 2 of his own closest bodyguards were Nizari agents who had infiltrated his personal guard. That level of penetration is staggering to consider. The most famous Crusader victim was Conrad of Montferrat, the newly elected king of Jerusalem. On the evening of April the 28th, 1192, Conrad was walking home through the streets of Tyre after dining with the Bishop of Beauvais. 2 young men, who had been embedded in his household for months, posing as Christian monks, rushed him and stabbed him with daggers. Conrad died shortly after. One assassin was killed on the spot. The other fled to a nearby church, was captured, briefly interrogated, and executed. Who actually ordered the hit remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the Crusades. Suspects range from Richard the Lionheart to Saladin himself, though neither theory is particularly convincing. The most chilling detail is the patience. Those two Fedai had lived alongside Conrad for at least 6 months before the attack, maintaining their false identities every single day, praying in churches, eating with their target, earning his trust, all while knowing what they were there to do. The fall. The Nizari Ismaili state endured for over 160 years. It survived the Seljuks. It survived the Crusaders. It survived Saladin, but it could not survive the Mongols. In the 1250s, the Mongol Empire under Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, swept westward. The Mongols saw the Nizari fortresses as obstacles to their expansion and launched a systematic campaign to destroy them. Castle after castle fell. In 1256, the last Nizari imam, Rukn al-Din Kursha, surrendered Alamut after a siege. The Mongols dismantled the fortress, burned its legendary library, and massacred Ismaili communities across the region. In 1275, Nizari forces briefly recaptured Alamut in a last act of defiance. But the Mongols retook it in 1282, and the Nizari state was finished as a military power. The Fedai faded into history, but their name didn't. The word assassin entered every European language, a permanent reminder of the small band of devoted men who proved that a single person with a dagger and enough conviction could reshape the political map of the medieval world. Why this matters. The Nizari Ismailis pioneered a form of warfare that the modern world would recognize instantly. Targeted killings, deep cover operatives, and psychological operations designed to achieve strategic goals without conventional military force. They did it not out of nihilism or bloodlust, but as a survival strategy for a persecuted religious minority surrounded on all sides by enemies with vastly superior armies. Modern scholars emphasize that the Nizari targeted only political and military figures. They did not attack civilians. They didn't engage in random violence. They used the minimum force necessary to achieve their political objectives, which, when you compare their methods to the wholesale slaughter that conventional medieval armies routinely inflicted on civilian populations, starts to look almost restrained. The Fedai themselves were not drugged zombies or mindless fanatics. They were educated, multilingual, disciplined men who accepted extraordinary personal risk in service of their community's survival. Their story has been distorted by centuries of propaganda from their enemies and romanticized beyond recognition by Western storytellers. The real story is more compelling than any legend. A tiny sect, clinging to mountain fortresses, held off the greatest empires of the medieval world through sheer audacity and the willingness of a few devoted men to walk into the courts of kings and never walk out again. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of a medieval assassin, hit that like button and subscribe for more on what medieval life was really like. What other medieval figures would you like to see covered? Drop it in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.